All right. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. You know, your comments reminded me that the Wisconsin idea is actually based on the sifting and winnowing of intellectual ideas and facts. And this is an agricultural analogy. And I mention that because in the College of Ag and Life Sciences, we're very proud of the way we serve America's dairy land and all the work that we have ongoing in dairy and sustainability and the nexus in between those. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about something really important, which is dairy economics. And I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker. Mike Brown is the Vice President for Dairy Market Intelligence at Jacoby Company. In this role, he serves as the subject matter expert on milk pricing policy and the dairy supply chain. Mike has spent nearly 4 decades working for both farmer-owned cooperatives and proprietary businesses. Before joining Jacoby, he was the chief economist for the International Dairy Foods Association. And before that, Mike led the milk and dairy procurement team for the Kroger Company as director of the dairy supply chain. Mike has served as a dairy economist for well-known dairy brands and organizations, including Glanbia, Dairygold, and National All Jersey Incorporated. He was raised on a small dairy farm in western New York and earned his bachelor's degree in dairy science from Virginia Tech, which he told me he's really proud of as an economist to have a degree in dairy science as well. Please join me in welcoming Mike to the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be introduced by another fellow Hokie. So I appreciate that as well. I truly believe that that is another school that understands the value of not just basic but applied research. The Virginia State Dairy Association over the years has played a role in that. Keep in mind, I graduated in '82. I'm an old man, but it's really my first exposure to public supportive research, and I never forgot that message, as you're going to see in a minute. Let's see here. There we go. So I'm going to talk about the impact of research on the dairy supply chain, because over my career, starting on a farm and ending up buying products for a large consumer grocery store, I've had the opportunity to experience most of it. And it's played a big role. And you're going to see as I walk through my career path how many different times I've used university research in my job, because it's a lot. I think early on I gained a respect for that and have always continued to use that, and you'll appreciate the very first example. So what defines a supply chain? Well, these are some good examples shared to me by Chuck Nicholson, and again, thank you, Chuck, for this. All the parties involved, directly or indirectly, in fulfilling a customer request. Everything from the inputs on the dairy to packaging and landing in a grocery store or in a restaurant. That's the dairy supply chain, so it's big. A set of structures and processes a group of organizations uses to deliver an output to a customer. Just a new definition, same kind of thing. It's very broad and has very many steps. And then processes, operations, and entities that take food from its raw material state to our plates, which may be the most appropriate one for dairy. And we'll talk a little more about that with our next slide. This is a model. Again, thank you, Chuck, for finding this and sharing it with me from an article on basically on addressing effects of food systems, but it's a nice kind of a map showing you starting with your farm input and your production, moving to handlers. In the case of dairy, that's often cooperatives or directly into a manufacturer. Once those products are made, in the manufacturing step may be 2 or 3 different processes, for example, making bulk cheese and packaging into consumer packages. Wholesale logistics, which is in some ways the most complicated and frankly often the most challenging part, particularly in the early 2020s with COVID and all the transportation challenges that we all had. Moving there into, whether it's food and beverage, basically what we call food service, institutional buyers, places like UW, who not all, by the way, have great ice cream and cheese made on campus they can enjoy, and I might argue meats as well. Retail food, and then again, food banks. You can see there's several cycles where that moves, and then back to that consumer. So we have lots of ways that food can move, but it gives you kind of a physical picture. And research that the Dairy Hub impacts every single level of this, which is one of the things that I find so amazing, the way you work. And quite honestly, the way that you're engaging all three very good universities in Wisconsin in the process, I think, is also very admirable. So here's a simple example. We're going to talk about cheese and whey. In the upper left corner is kind of a simple chart which shows what happens to farm milk, and this is really based on how milk is priced to a great degree. You basically, when you bring milk in, you're going to have cream, and you're going to make standardized cheese milk, which means you're going to adjust that cream to the level that you want, or you're going to add solids to get the protein to fat ratio you want in most plants. And once you have that milk, you're going to make cheese, and you're going to have what we call wet whey, which is just basically is about 12% solids that comes off the plant. And then that can become many, many things. And UW over the years has been very, very involved in how we make wet whey add value, and everything from consumer health to just improving margins for whey, which also in the end improves margins for farmers. You can condense it and dry it. That's kind of the base form. Then you can filter it. Ultrafiltration became really popular in the 1980s. Ironically, in Wisconsin, a great part of that was you had a very large veal industry, and you also had a time when the federal government was no longer buying gazillion pounds of non-fat dry milk, which they were selling at a cut rate back into feed. So we needed a substitute. WPC 34, which is 34% crude protein whey, was that product that filled a lot of that need. Since then, we've come a long way, and now we're making 80s, 90s, and what we call whey protein isolate. And we're even going beyond that. In this chart over to the lower right, again, I know it looks like it belongs in a library book, not on a screen, but basically, we just continue to develop new uses for those products, continue to develop processes to extract those products. And UW, everything from human nutrition through Center for Dairy Research and the Dairy Science, Dairy Foods, has been actively involved with that entire process. You've been a big, big player in that market, and as a result, Wisconsin has been a leader, particularly early on with whey proteins. So, my experience, and I apologize for the slides. Apparently, your PowerPoint didn't like my PowerPoint, so they're a little bit jumbled, but the information's all there. I don't normally use a font that looks like a typewriter, but PowerPoint decided I needed to do that, and if you saw me type, you would know why. Anyway, I'm going to go back to our little dairy, Brown Cow Farm, which grew out of my love of cows. We had a small dairy, a small farm. We just raised heifers. My dad worked for New York Dairy Herd Improvement. He was, what they used to call a milk tester until they became DHI supervisors, which was a fancy name for a milk tester. And my mom was a school librarian. And so we decided to milk a few cows because we had enough outside income to support a small, unprofitable, but well-loved dairy. And I think the real thing that I found there, as far as where did research hit me, was sire evaluations. I was one into the cattle genetics. And during the time, we had the Northeast AA sire comparisons. PD 74, keep in mind I graduated from high school in 77. PD 74 is when we went to what we call modified contemporary comparisons. It greatly improved the accuracy of sire evaluation for their genetics. Again, a process that UW's always been involved with and is till this day. And so we could make better selections on how to improve our herd. And that all goes back to university research. Somatic cell counts, milk quality, milk protein testing, which was in infancy in those days, and a lot of that came out of Cornell, also helped in Madison. So we had a lot of that. And the genetics also, the Agriculture Research Service at USDA played a big role. The genetic part of that now, by the way, it was privatized several years ago, and considering current budget cuts, that's probably a blessing. And thankfully, the industry supported all that work. So my next step was a 2-year school, and I'm going to be full disclosure, I was accepted into Cornell out of high school, and I was so intimidated by it, I didn't go. So I went to Alfred State College, which is a 2-year tech school, and I was a animal husbandry major. And I talked about my role at Brown Cow Farm was the unpaid family labor, and then I went to Alfred State College in my first farm management course, learned what unpaid family labor was, and realized it was me. So that was my first formal lesson on farm economics that really hit home. And it was my first exposure to industry-supported research, as you might imagine. There's a set of ag and tech schools in New York State that work very closely with Cornell, and so a lot of your teachings came out of research from Cornell and, of course, other universities as well. This is where I first began to see the value of what that information could bring, more than just helping me pick a better bull to breed my cows to. Virginia Tech, where I went after that and got a degree in dairy science, really heightened my exposure to university research, and in a very, very positive way. I have a BS of dairy science, like I said, from that. I was involved with feeding trials with IsoPlus, which was a product that improves feed conversion efficiency, which also really stinks, so I had to leave my dorm clothes in a bag outside my room because they didn't want them in there. But I began to see, and with the professors there, great communicators, also a lot of great researchers, a lot of applied research was very helpful. In those days, I hope it still continues, the Virginia State Dairymen's Association had a partnership with Virginia Tech. They funded scholarships, they funded research, and so it gave Virginia Tech some incentive to do a lot of applied work. Basic research was still being done, but they worked very hard to make sure, how does that apply to industry? What's the next step? And they have also provided some great people to this college over time. Your leader, and also in food science with Rusty, great guy. He was there when I was there, and he was really good with students. People who didn't like food science liked it because of him, so he did a great job. So that was important. National Milk Producers Federation is where I really started building professional working relationships. A lot of that was with the Economic Research Service, Ag Research Service. My role there was as an economist. I took a lot of economics when I was in college because I liked it, and I was hired by a former Ag Econ professor at Virginia Tech. He says, I need somebody who understands farm management, who likes economics. So he plucked me out of cooperative extension, which is where I had been working up to that point. And basically, we evaluated production technologies. BST was a big issue in the early 90s, and I spent a lot of time working with universities and going to research farms, seeing some of the things going on with that. Cornell, Michigan State are two good examples. And then federal regulatory and legislative policy, and I'm a fairly emotional person, so I try very hard to keep my decisions fact-based because I'll make the wrong decision if I don't. It's kind of like shopping when you're really hungry. You don't make good decisions. If you're armed with good data, you'll make better ones, and thank goodness for schools like UW, it's available. National Jersey is where I went, and I was raised with Jersey cows. I have a love for that. And my job there was really, National Jersey is the milk marketing arm of the American Jersey Cattle Association. Back in the 1960s, the Jersey Association worked very hard to turn itself from being basically a social club into how do we breed a profitable cow, and at the same time, because we had high solids milk, particularly high protein, how do we incentivize the market to pay for what we make, which is high protein? Obviously, a state with Wisconsin, where you're 80% plus cheese, it's a big deal. So at that point, I worked a lot with plants on incentives for protein. It wasn't regulated pricing then in the upper Midwest. I did a lot with plants on just efficiencies, tracking components through their plants. One of the most enjoyable projects I had was actually working with Alto Dairy when Dean Summer was still there, before you very luckily grabbed him away for CDR. And so it was a chance, again, to use data, use research, and again, lots of schools. Utah State did a lot of early work on cheese yield, Cornell as well, Dave Barbeno, Madison, and then kind of the genetic side of economics, Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, Penn State, OSU, and Washington State, a lot of work on feed efficiency, all places that I was able to use information from in that job. Went from there to the Northwest Dairy Association, which is the co-op side of Dairy Gold, the big dairy company out of Seattle. Again, a lot of that was milk regulation, also plant efficiencies, also incentives to producers. What should we be paying for in milk? What's the economic value, for example, of quality? And then also risk management. Early risk management work, again, UW had some real leaders. It was Bob Kropp and Ed Jesse and others. You know, keep in mind my age. These are all people most of you don't even know that are retired. Well, everybody knows Bob, but they're all people that I couldn't have done my work as well without them. Glammy Nutritionals, which is a large cheese and whey protein company, they are actually based in Kilkenny, Ireland, but they have significant manufacturing capacity in the U.S., including Idaho, and I was based in Twin Falls for a while. And that was basically milk quality evaluation. Again, how do we decide what the economic value of that is? And again, university information was very invaluable. Cornell, particularly in some of the impacts of when you mix high and low somatic cell count milk, what does that do to the actual yield value of that? Because somatic cells affect the protein quality in milk, and if you have high cell count, Even if your protein level is fairly strong, you will get reduced cheese yield because your proteins degrade quicker. Again, something I didn't know until I talked to a lot of professors. We did some alternative cost-based milk pricing. A lot of that was farm management data. How can we ensure a farmer margin? We had a couple of retail food service partners where we had a cheese price based on the cost of soybeans, corn, fuel oil, inflation, which was, we used the federal funds rate. And it allowed them, at that point, futures markets were very small, weren't very liquid. We were able to forward price for 2 years off of those prices because they could hedge those prices. And so that was a fun project that I hope to get involved with again in my new job. And then regulatory and trade, again, big issues. Again, working with a lot of the dairy economists across the industry. The first 2 stops, frankly, were always Cornell and University of Wisconsin. And they've been kind of the thought leaders in those areas of policy and trade, and also just modeling supply chain. The best work done has been a partnership between those 2 universities, and it's still relevant. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so again, Madison, Cornell, Minnesota, New Mexico State, dealing with water supply issues and environmental issues in the Texas Panhandle, and University of Idaho, and South Dakota State, another great dairy school. So lots of different ways that I've used universities in these different jobs. Kroger was a great opportunity, and I learned one thing for sure. I'm enjoying working with a family-owned company again because it's massive. Our dairy buy for our team was $1.5 billion, but in the size of Kroger, that's not that big. We supplied 17 plants, 14 Class 1 ice cream, and 2 cheese cut-and wraps. And we were responsible for the buy for that, as well as for any branded products that Kroger didn't package, the biggest buy being butter, second biggest being cream cheese. So again, in that role, probably not a big surprise, dairy sustainability and animal care, which had been important at Glanbia and certainly important at Dairy Gold, became a primary focus. And again, University of Madison, and particularly some of the troubleshooting, we'll talk about that in a second, the CDR, South Dakota State, Cornell, DMI, who funded a lot of good work and provided that information, and many others. There's so many at Kroger, I can't even keep track of all they all were. But in the case of dealing with quality control, supply issues, particularly some performance issues with cheese, CDR was invaluable. And I mean that, invaluable. Even though I had a lot of experience in cheese plants and I thought I knew what was wrong, and for the most part I was usually right, when you bring in experts who worked with dozens of cheese plants to work with your suppliers, because Kroger, we're very proud, we buy more cheese from Wisconsin than any other state. We got great service, and we were able to fix the problems, and so we didn't change suppliers. And some of them were kind of simple, some were more complicated, but the CDR team did a great job for us. Then the International Dairy Foods Association, I retired from Kroger. That was my first retirement. And IDFA, I was chair of the Economic Policy Committee at IDFA as a Kroger employee and a member of IDFA. When I told them I was leaving, they asked, we know federal orders are going to get updated. I've been involved with that on that committee. Would you be willing to work with us and help lead us through that process? And I said, yes, I would, because if we're going to make the system function, it's got to be updated. It hadn't been changed essentially 20 years. And you know what's happened in the world of economics, including estimates of costs. So we needed new data. And UW, I chuckle, and I've told my Ag Econ friends this, for the literally millions and millions of dollars that were spent for a hearing, for lawyers, hotels, lawyers, transportation, lawyers, lots of lawyer money. And they make better money than economists, because we hired one UW alumni and a current employee, and that was Mark Stevenson and Chuck Nicholson. Chuck worked on you can call it it's called the Dairy Sector Simulator Model, which was originally developed at Cornell, and it's become much more sophisticated. His computing power and Chuck's brain were able to help with that. He worked with Mark on that, which gives us a spatial value of milk in different markets. What's it worth relative to other markets? It's a guidance for setting regulated pricing. It was one of 2 very, very important pieces of research that really determined the outcome of that hearing, and I think successfully. That was one. The other was University of Wisconsin dairy plant cost surveys. For years, Cornell did surveys. Mark was involved with them at that point. He's been involved with the federal order surveys since 2000, when we first changed to our current pricing and federal orders, the overall system. And he updated that information so we had modern data. USDA made it very clear, I don't want opinions, I want data. And Mark partnered with us to do a great job, and our other thanks goes to the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, who also played a role in getting that information done and getting plants to participate. We had tremendous participation. We had over half the U.S. cheddar production in that survey. That's pretty remarkable, and a lot of it was Wisconsin milk, even more upper Midwest milk. So it's a big, I would say those two studies are why we're, I think, very optimistic we're going to be back to a functioning federal order system on June 1st when these changes all take place. And a lot of the credit goes to either alumni or current professors at UW. And quite honestly, we're all worried where we're going to go next time. At some point, Mark's going to just stay in his cabin in Michigan and not answer the phone. And Chuck and I are close to the same age, so I have no prediction of how long he's going to tolerate our crazy industry. Well, that was a great job. I didn't like it. It's not business. It's not marketing. And so when the hearing decision was announced, it was a Friday. The following Tuesday, I gave a review to IDFA members on what it meant. Wednesday, my retirement was announced, and my old friend Ted Jacoby from TC Jacoby called me the next day and said, would you be interested in working part-time for us? Because I plan to do some consulting work, because once you're in dairy, you're a bit of a codependent. You never quite leave it. So I have the nicest title I've ever had, VP of Dairy Intelligence. However, I'm not sure it's accurate, but dairy's accurate. And I'll be doing supply-demand balancing, buy-sell strategy, because Kroger is a broker, and they buy and sell product. They balance for a lot of plants based on what their contract needs are versus their production. As we all know, cows make milk whether the market needs it sometimes or not, and so part of their role is that. I'm chuckling because one of the things Kroger builds into its supply contracts is flex and how much product they'll take. And Ted chuckled. He says, you know who takes that product when Kroger can't use it? It's us. I said, well, that's good. You're helping serve the market. And we pay a premium for cheese that we buy with those kind of contracts, which allows them to work with folks like Jacoby. They also are a very key exporter. They were the first company to open a trade office in Mexico after NAFTA. It wasn't any of the big boys, it was Jacoby. And so they're also big in that market. And so the beauty of this job, I get to work on everything from soup to nuts. And I can't even tell you yet who my partners are all going to be, but I'll guarantee you there's folks in this room I'll be asking for help from. And I'm very excited about that. If you haven't figured out by now, I'm a PhD that's 2 degrees shy of that honor. So I rely heavily on the folks in this room to give me the assistance I need. And I'm a very, very strong advocate. So, I think it's pretty clear I've benefited from both direct and work funded by others throughout my career. Direct research, certainly milk components and yields and plant economics has been a big part of that. And also economics at the farm level. And particularly helpful has been some of the farm management groups in Wisconsin, but also University of Minnesota with their FinBin system. For Midwest costs, they're the best too. Genetics, productivity, herd life, economic efficiency, not only from the standpoint of more milk out of a cow, but frankly more components out of a cow, while maintaining wellness and increasing herd life. And we're making some great strides in that, and we'll get to a lot of that work is happening here. And then research from others. This is our work that Jersey directed to have done, parts of it. And then work from others that was published, and we had experts in I was able to use. And on pretty much everything, it's almost a list of what the Dairy Hub's looking at, which as I put this together, and you'll see a chart that'll be familiar to you in a second, I'm thinking, look at all the different ways that they work, and they're all ways that I have used in my career. And again, we're not alone. My organizations I work with aren't the only ones that have used this information. Glambia specifically is involved with the Jackrabbit Council, which supports South Dakota State University's Dairy Center. What South Dakota State provides for Glambia is people that are used to living in arid, flat areas, so they moved to Twin Falls, Idaho, and it looks like home, so they like it. Plus, it's got a nice big river. But DMI, we're all familiar with Dairy Market Inc., and they do a lot of the consumer-based research. Some nutrition work has been extremely important. You know, butter is no longer the redheaded stepchild. It's an important product, and we can hardly make enough of it. Dairy Nutrition Council, same thing. American Dairy Products Association partners with different universities, including some partnerships here in Wisconsin. Holstein Foundation, Jersey Research Foundation, Virginia State Dairy Association. These are ones I'm familiar with. And the genetic organizations, Association of Animal Breeders and the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, who now runs the whole AI, the whole genomics and sire analytic business. USDA passed it on. Jackrabbit Council. And there's so many more. I mean, Glanbia's funded research projects, particularly in the area of weight functionality and other things that have happened. And not only the research, but the extension, the education, the application of that research has been really, really valuable to our industry, and it's extremely important. So thankfully, your annual report had exactly what I needed to show how the hub is so relevant. Because you look at land and water, sustainability, environmental impacts, fertility, productivity, farm business and community. Community wellness is important too. You don't have economic success if you don't have community success. They go hand in hand. People who don't see that I view as kind of selfish, because I don't see how everybody in the long term has to win. Because if you don't have healthy customers living in a healthy environment, they won't be your customer forever because they won't be there. Animal health and welfare, I think we've all seen animal wellness, how important that's become. I know there's some good work being done here. I know we're going to hear a little bit about slaughter plants later as far as employees and employee health. And human health and nutrition. Again, I'll go back to the whey example. There's pioneering work going on in whey nutrition impacts and possibilities. At the same time, there's people figuring out how to extract those products so that we can milk them. And it's all happening in 3 campuses in Wisconsin. And it's all coordinated through the Innovation Hub, which is just, every state needs one. You're blessed to have one. And I'm going to take marching orders from Maria on how, if she needs help with lobbying, what I can do from little Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is where I live. So, again, but another thing, and I think the thing that the Innovation Hub does very, very well, is for research to have an impact, it needs to provide value in the context of the supply chain, which we talked about a little earlier. Economic, social, environmental. It's not only financial benefits, it's social well-being. Again, Maria, we went out to dinner last night. We were talking about some of the rural counties that have the best overall wellness in health tend to be big dairy counties because farms hire labor. Farms are competitive for labor. It's a tight market for everyone. A lot of our cheese plants are unionized, but if they're not, you can't hire someone off the street to work in the cheese plant. They pay better. They tend to have health benefits. They tend to have more going on. And I was in Muscadet, Wisconsin yesterday at Meister Cheese, and there was 2 things that struck me. One is they had a whey RO separator, basically a protein separator. They've had that system since 1981. It's one of the first I know of in the country, which is remarkable. Second of all, I went by a Gunderson clinic on the way to the plant. And so this little town of 1,000 people has access to good health care. So if you want to live in a beautiful place like the Driftless, if you're in Muscadet, you can probably get a good job and you can probably have health care. So it's important. So it's bigger than just farmers making money and plants making money. It's everybody succeeding and benefiting from the differences. Production efficiencies, talk about, I mentioned ISO Plus before, which wasn't a big commercial success, but actually there's more interest now in that whole process probably in recent years. Talking about, and I'll talk about Kent Weigel in a minute, because I knew him when I was at Jersey, and I kind of stayed out of the genetics business for the last 20 years, and I'm getting ready for this talk, and it's like, well, he's still doing great work, and that whole team is still doing great work. Counter processor to consumer, how do we do a better job with our filtration, the work at CDR with plants with yield efficiencies and product loss and plant loss, which isn't only an economic benefit, it's an environmental benefit. The less solids you send through a waste treatment center, the better off everybody is. To consumer nutrition and health work, and again, some of the pioneering work we're seeing right now with whey isolates on human health. Environmental impacts, I think we all know that. And Wisconsin is poised, and the upper Midwest is poised. We are in the best competitive advantage of anywhere in the country because we have water. But that also can create environmental challenges. How we manage that. And there's a lot of work being done here. Global warming, I know there's been some work done here. And You can argue who caused it or not, whether you all want to believe in it, but it's important. And you're leading that charge too. Food safety, I think that's a given, but particularly now with some of the cuts at FDA, we're all a little concerned what's going to happen there. And then industry economics, all parts of the supply chain have to be healthy, otherwise it won't work. I remember my dad as a kid said, when you're selling cattle, because we used to sell some cows, we always had a few extra, and he'd say, if the buyer and the seller aren't both happy, you won't have a customer again. And that's just good common sense. And then, of course, new product development, which you're also leaders in. You've got some of the best researchers in the world at UW. So your annual report gives a real concise summary of the importance of the work that it's doing. And rather than to be creative, I just stole it. I hope that's okay. Tools and technology produce more milk with less cows lying in the water. Efficiencies, both environmental benefits, a lot of times cow care, so you have cow comfort benefits, welfare benefits, as well as economic benefits. It's amazing how those often tie together. Improve the quality of life for dairy animals and build consumer trust. That is a very, very important issue. We're seeing some growth again in fluid milk sales the last couple of years. I think part of that is consumers, they figured out that an almond doesn't have a lot of protein. And there's more emulsifiers in almond milk than there is almonds. And people trust our industry, and that's a lot of DMI's work, but also a lot of research in places like here. Base, abundant, and nutritious food supply for all people, and that means both people who work in the industry as well as those who are our customers. Talent to live and work in Wisconsin. Now, I am from the snow belt of western New York, so I think your weather is wonderful because it's just as cold, but I don't get 120 inches of snow a year. I kind of like it. It is a great place to work, and its social fabric in the state is amazing. And again, new products and uses for milk, continue to grow our industry. And a lot of that, too, I think we have more and more opportunities for export. We'll talk about that a little later. And then keep us competitive nationally and rural communities strong, and we are doing that in spades. One of the advantages Wisconsin has as a buyer of products is you're close to customers. I don't have to move cheese from Twin Falls, Idaho, to my cut and wrap plant in Rochester, Minnesota, so I can sell the cheese in Atlanta. I can move it from Wisconsin to Minnesota and sell it in Atlanta, and that's where most of it comes from, or in South Dakota. It's the third state, another big dairy state. So you're in a great position. And one of my key work with my team at Kroger was getting to understand landed cost. What does it cost to get that product? If it meets your spec, if you believe in the company, you trust them, local has value. And especially if you're short on product and need it quick, they can usually help you out. So we've continued. A lot of people think all cheddar cheese comes out of the West. It's not true. A lot of ours, I say the bulk of ours, comes out of the upper Midwest. And we're quite proud of that, quite by the way. Since I live here, I'm particularly proud of it. And so we need to keep ourselves strong, and I think the work of the hub is doing that. A couple of examples. I'll come back to genomics. When you're raised with Jersey cows, you make less milk, but you make more protein and fat. It's richer. Not necessarily, a lot of times more pounds of fat, but you'll make your contents richer, so your yields are higher. Your cheese yields about 115% of what used to be the average Holstein yield. So you could talk about, and you have feed efficiency because you have less body weight, so that cow takes less feed for maintenance. Well, UW, and Kent was very involved with this, basically developed an efficiency measure, basically by doing good old-fashioned research with partnership with many, many universities, figuring out feed intake, milk output, what's the efficiency, how much is lost in maintenance of that cow. And it isn't just size, it's weight. So what they found was that we could develop basically a feed efficiency or a feed savings measure for dairy cattle selection, which is now part of what we call the net merit, the USDA or the Council of Dairy Cattle Feeding net merit, which is basically an index of how profitable a bull's daughters will be relative to a baseline. And so basically, what they've basically done, and then combining that with genomics, so we now can measure that through genomics. Feed needs per pound of cheese yield. If I'm a farmer, if I can sell a pound of fat and protein and it costs me less because of that cow's efficiency, I make more money. It isn't always, again, go back to my dad, because we never had the highest DHI average, and as a kid, of course, I thought that was embarrassing. And he says, it's not how much money you bring in, it's how much you get to keep that matters. And it's that efficiency that's so important. And then dairy cattle fertility. And, you know, when I was a kid, you just hope they got pregnant. Now we have things we can use. And oversync is a very good example, double oversync protocol, which allows you to basically sync heats so that, particularly cows that don't show strong heats, and high-producing cows often don't. You improve your pregnancy rates. But not only do you do that, you improve calving interval, and you extend the herd life of cows who, if you couldn't get pregnant, would be leaving the herd and being on a burger somewhere. So it's another good example of what we're doing to improve, I would argue, in the long term, is animal welfare. That cow's around longer, and she's making more money for her owner, who will then need to raise less heifers for replacements, which will save him money on input costs. And we could talk for years on dairy beef, because that's part of the reason dairy beef's become so popular. And again, a lot of good work here on that. So, in my mind, we talked about those examples, and you can talk about food science, you can talk about other things. From my personal experience, it's been the Center for Dairy Research, and I should also add the Ag Econ Department and the Center for Dairy Profitability's work on economics have been the most valuable to me in my career. I cannot count the number of times CDR has helped me with projects with plants I was working with over the years, or just general background information. Bill Wendorf used to be at the department, and he was my way go-to when I had whey questions. He was everything from what I can do if I don't have a way to process it for land spreading to, you know, what if I got a plant, what should I be looking at for fractions? And a good example of how popular and important there are, Wisconsin cheesemakers and Center for Dairy Research put on a joint meeting every April. It's either in Madison or Milwaukee. It rotates. And I know a lot of you have probably been there. I strongly encourage you to go, because it's a beautiful example. You have thousands of industry participants listening to the latest in research. They're also trying to strike deals on selling a little extra cheese they have, but it's amazing. It's probably the longest, and I would say the best example of a big industry event where we have combined markets with research, and CDR is key to it. It's a true partnership. And then how basic and more commercial research, again, we can talk about, I think whey is the best example of what we've done on human nutrition. I remember when Glanby was giving staff lactoferrin because they didn't have a market for it. They had it in little pouches. Trust me, they're not giving it to their employees anymore. I mean, that's become very valuable. And that's a lot of that work happened here, and there's more and more of that happening everywhere. And then also how those combined provide more value. And we'll talk about that, because basic research is if you're a manager of a company, it may not seem as sexy or as important, but it is. But in the long term, everything we do should be having social, economic, welfare benefits, because long term, that's the goal of research, to improve our lives. In fact, if any of you haven't seen it, there's a really good PBS show in Wisconsin on the Wisconsin idea, and everybody in the state should watch it and be reminded of what it meant, because we watched it the other day. I spent too many years in Ohio. I got cynical. I had to get refreshed. But anyway, you need to look at that, and that doesn't mean that, you know, the applied work is fun and it's great when you can, when Kent Weigel can take the work he did and change it into formulas so we can pick better bullets to make profitability. But the work that went behind that, the nutrition work, all the work years before, same with the whey proteins, I mentioned that many times. The processes to isolate these products before it became practice, it's all important. But in the end, it all provides some kind of welfare, or I would use the economic term as a non-economist utility, whether it's financial utility, wellness utility, social utility, it's all important. And everything you do in this room contributes to that. It may not be as direct as some of the work, like the work I get from Chuck and Mark, but the work behind that is so incredibly important. And we in commercial industry have to be reminded of that sometimes, because we're always looking for the next way to make a dollar, and you need to support. So it can't all be short-term and applied. That work is essential, is that basic research. We all know and respect that in this room is absolutely essential, but its impacts are hard to predict, but that's the part of the idea of basic research. It's discovery. You're trying to figure out, is there something here? We think there may be. It's that whole, the whole hypothesis question. Is there something here we should be looking at? And basic research builds off of basic research eventually. If the numbers are there, it comes. But it's something that's always good to have in the back of your mind. What's the benefit long term? And it doesn't have to be a cheese plant makes more money, or even a farmer makes more money. Does it provide other benefits to our industry and to our communities far beyond dairy over time? So we need that human health and environmental particularly, and biochemistry, I would argue. And, full disclosure, when you're at Virginia Tech, you have a chance of taking a year of biochemistry or organic chemistry, or you can take a semester. Actually, it was quarters back then when I was there. Guess who took the quarter? I learned how tetracycline worked, which affects dairy too, and calcium. But anyway, this pre-competitive research isn't always as sexy. It doesn't have immediate impacts. It provides the knowledge base for future work. And one of the things I really enjoy about, I came to the presentations last fall of the Hub, and how we talked about some basic research, but what the long-term implications might be. So you're thinking ahead. What we're doing now, long-term, may have this benefit, because it's extremely important, and universities are the place for that to happen, because complete objectivity is so important with basic research. You can't, we don't need to have anybody putting a thumb on the scale. So, their approach, again, I think the Dairy Innovation Hub's approach does that pretty much perfectly. Working partners with the industry are important where possible. We all know that, and they do a good job with outreach. I think us in industry have an opportunity to expand that message more, because it is so important. The portfolio approach to research, the diversity of the research, both long and short-term needs, again, that basic work that's going to provide long-term benefits, as well as what's in a more immediate need that we can look at and hopefully help industry solve some problems. And as I mentioned many times, allocate resources to best maximize benefits. This isn't about a plant margin in a cheese plant or margin on a farm. Those are extremely important, because businesses have to be successful to grow. But all the other things that go with that, because when your farm's successful, you also can take better care of your employees. Same with the cheese plant, all the way down through. So it's economic indirectly on everything, but those environmental and societal are also very, very important. And you can forget that sometime when we're looking, particularly work for a publicly traded company. It's hard to get them to think beyond 90 days sometimes. And to the point, obviously, Dairy Innovation Hub has done great work. I think it's a model for other states to be adopting for the investment that's being made. You think the size of our industry in the state, it's pennies. It's not even pennies, it's parts of pennies. And it has huge effects. And what we also know, as I was mentioned earlier, is that research funding is in jeopardy. It's as much, I think, political and philosophical as it is based in any reality. Certainly very short-sighted, in my view. But we also are dealing with big budget deficits, and that doesn't always help when you're looking for something to cut, like the USDA. But no university is immune from those federal challenges, which means industry and state support is going to be more important than ever. In my view, the trade associations I work with, the companies I work with, finding ways to partner with universities becomes more important. So, again, your story is great. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's exciting to be here. This is such a unique organization, and it's making some real benefits. Your annual report isn't a half a page. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot going on. And in telling the story, you do well. We as industry need to help magnify that. I know the Wisconsin Cheesemakers are pretty good at that. I think a lot of the farm groups, Farm Bureau, PDPW, Dairy, help me with the other one, Dairy Business Association, all realize the value of what's going on here and their strong supports. And how can I help with that? Find companies I work with to fund projects, but also make sure the legislature realizes how crucial this is for the success of the industry. Dairy industry pays a lot of taxes in Wisconsin, and for the investment, the return is, I think, remarkable. So we need to spread that message, and I commit to doing that. And people who know me know when I commit to something, I'm a little bit like a fundamentalist preacher. I don't give up easy, so hopefully I'll help long term. So, summary again, what is the supply chain? We talked about this before. It's everything from the inputs for the dairy all the way to the consumer. Define it how you want. That's what it is. These are repeating for some reason. Weird. Oh, I'm just going to not worry about it because we're getting close on time. But I think the point is that I, throughout my entire career, and I may have a little different, I have such a respect for value of research, partly because I know I'm not capable of knowing this myself. I got to go to other people to make me look smart. It's so key. This is an organization that is focused on providing that for our industry, for our communities, for the state, and to the point earlier, nation and the world. As I look at the dairy industry, I look at water resource issues in the West, I see ability for expanding production around the world. We have a great opportunity, if we do it right, to continue to grow the upper Midwest dairy industry. I don't care if it's in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, the Dakotas, it's there. This is the kind of work that will help us do that successfully, and anything that helps us do it right the first time without making as many mistakes is, of course, a benefit to all of us. So I thank you very much for your time. This is a lot of fun putting this together. It's fun reading about all that you do. I kind of knew, I know a lot more now. Any questions?
All right, testing. Okay, we're in business. If anyone has any questions for Mike, I'll come around to you. Thanks for your patience as we work out the mic issues.
Maybe your microphone is also operated by Microsoft PowerPoint. That's the problem.
Check.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. Any questions for Mike? Questions about the dairy supply chain, burning questions that you might have. Industry insights. Don't be shy. Oh. I'm coming. Sorry about that.
Okay, I have a question. It may be a provocative group question. So you made a really strong case as a member of industry for standing up for both basic and applied research. And my question is, do you think that others are going to follow that lead?
Well, since we all benefit from the basic research that ends up in the applications that we use and the things that we do, I think it's part of telling that story, that you don't get to where we are in whey separation and whey processes and value without the basic research in human nutrition and biochemistry and physical equipment, UF technology, without that. So part of it is telling that broader story. The problem you have with industry, and it's particularly bad with larger corporations, is they all have quarterly reports they have to give. I mean, at Kroger, we worry more about the quarterly report, I think, than long-term profitability sometimes. So you have to, it will not be easy, but you can't accept defeat. We have to work at it, and you need to work with folks like John Paper and Rebecca and myself to help you send that message, because it is important. And those who know me know if I believe in something, you're going to hear about it, because it is very, very important. But it's also important that they can understand the relevancy of that basic research, what it might mean down the future. Again, we all know with basic research, it's not null hypothesis. You don't know if it's going to mean anything or not. But if you think there's a chance, let them know what this may mean long term. And I think the Dairy Hub does a good job, even with your storyboards, explaining what some of that implication would be. That's a big part of it historically. The Journal of Dairy Science, Journal of Human Nutrition doesn't always care about that so much. It's that outreach to industries. It's a different message.
Real quick, Mike, can you take the microphone and just move it towards your mouth just a little bit?
I've never been accused of not being loud enough.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have another question right here.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. That was a great presentation. A couple questions about supply chain. Two questions. What do you see as the number one issue in terms of supply chain pressures on the dairy industry right now, and where do you see some things that may be pressure points in the future?
A couple of things. Let's talk demand side first. Our economy is weak. Consumers aren't comfortable. We're seeing food service issues. That's particularly a big deal for Wisconsin because we make so much specialty cheese, and so much of that cheese is used in food service. So it is a challenge. We saw it during COVID in spades when I was at Kroger, and our specialty cheese suppliers were begging for market because delis weren't open because of lack of staffing in stores. They're trying to keep the center aisles full and the dairy case full. And restaurants were closed down. So it was very, very hard for a lot of your premier specialty cheesemakers in the state because food service is so important, restaurant trade is so important to what they do. So I think that demand always needs to be one, and part of that gets into the animal care, the wellness, health and wellness, which I think we're doing a great job with messaging. People aren't afraid of butterfat anymore, which is great. I joke that I was raised with Dodge trucks and Jersey cows, and we weren't backwards. We were just 50 years ahead of our time, because butterfat is certainly back into vogue. So I do think that. The other thing is just keeping supply and demand in alignment. I think the biggest issue we have, two issues. I think the biggest one in the West, it's our ace in our hand, is water. I think the other one is labor, particularly farm labor. So far, that's got us all very, very concerned. There's, things happen, particularly some states where the farms are close to urban areas. People aren't showing up to work because they're afraid. And although we haven't had a lot of farm raids yet, there's certainly concern over long term because we all know how important our immigrant friends are in running our operations today, and not just the dairies, milk hauling, in some cases processing. And what some plants are learning, that E-Verify doesn't necessarily assure that it's accurate. It just means it passed the E-Verify test. And we've had I know a couple plants that have had issues with E-Verify because they thought it was right and it's not. And we're also seeing right now, people are so reactionary, mistakes are being made, and it's very clear that once they make a mistake, they don't want to turn it around. So I think labor is a huge, huge part. I think our sustainability story is starting to register better with people. People like dairy, it's natural. You talk about the whole thing with ultra-processed foods. What's ultra-processed? Well, there's only really one dairy product that I think you really would define, or it doesn't have to be, but is generally ultra-processed. That's ice cream, because of the emulsifiers that are in it. I mean, you make the biggest seller of sour cream in the country, it's milk, cream, and salt. The biggest maker of cottage cheese, milk, cream, salt. There's nothing cleaner labeled than a gallon of milk. So we're actually, I think, benefiting from that. So I really think it's labor, and I think it's also just keeping supply demand in balance so you have some stability in markets. Right now, we are where we are in the markets, which is very strong, ironically, with all the trade fights going on because of trade. U.S. prices are 20 to 40% below, or 20 to 30% below world prices for our commodity products. So we can even pay a retaliatory tariff and still be competitive in the market. And so that's what's happening. But that won't be forever. So again, I've learned a long time in this industry, you can't assume anything but what's happening today. You got to think about what may happen in the future, which is why this kind of work's so important, because it's trying to help us with that.
Right, another question over here.
Hey, Mike. My name is Mitch. I've got a quick question for you. So I do research with filtration along that whole whey processing pipeline, and I've often been told that some of those dairy stream co-products like WPC or WPBC are used as animal feed and given back to the cattle. I don't actually know what that physically looks like, though. Is that something that like a wholesale producer will purchase these co-products from the plants and then provide it back to the farmer? I was just kind of curious what that logistical system looked like for the farmer's perspective.
On the animal feed side, there's three products that get used extensively for: whey, WPC34, lactose, and permeate. And the permeate and lactose, to some degree whey, are because mammal infants require lactose. And so it's a way because they can't digest sugars like adults can digest sugars. So that's why China buys so much whey permeate. They buy 70% of the whey permeate we produce. And it's all to feed baby pigs. And thank goodness this little agreement we have, that market's moving again, because that was one of the biggest challenges we were having. And it's basically by people that manufacture those products. Or in some cases, for example, in Wisconsin, we have such a large calf population. Some people are making a liquid calf feed. It's basically got the water, it's pre-mixed, and it's delivered by truck. And for example, Meister Cheese, the plant I was talking about, they actually moved away from drying whey. They had an old dryer. They're WPC. They're now selling a condensed liquid product into a company who's basically selling it back to calf ranches and to farmers. So it can be different ways, but it's rarely, in the case of those whey products, fed directly to cows. Now, right now, because the permeate market's been so weak, we're seeing some permeate being fed back into cows. We're even seeing some land spreading again, that's from the days of old when whey had no value per se, and the cost of drying it with small plants was so high. And we have aggregators now that buy from small plants, so that product's getting into the market. But basically, you're selling it's an intermediate product, kind of like non-fat dry milk. It becomes an ingredient in something else. And on the feed side, it's the Land O'Lakes of the world that buy those products for calf milk replacer. You bet.
Okay, we've got a question over here, and this will be our last one.
Hi, good morning. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how artificial intelligence and big data is going to help support the dairy supply chain moving forward?
My experience, first of all, keep in mind, I'm so old, I don't use a mouse, I use keystrokes to do spreadsheets, okay, and arrow keys. I do use some, but that's probably why I don't have carpal tunnel yet. But it's a part where I'm working now. We're starting to do meetings, feed information in. We just started to tiptoe on that at IDFA, and this is just from the standpoint of information management, which I think a lot of what IAI is going to do for industries. When you have a meeting and you think you know what people talked about, when you get your AI notes, you say, oh my God, we spent 70% of the time on this, and it's just a note in our original notes. So it's helping clarify and focus. I think a lot of that will be the case. I mean, the whole idea, it saves processing. It just makes processing of information so much more efficient. So I think that will be a lot of it. But we will have AI processes in plant electronics. We'll have AI, just like we'll have it on the dairies. It's gonna come over. And a lot of that, though, is it's like anything. If it isn't programmed right, it won't work right. So like when Google, I say if I were to Google, I'm trying to think of a good example, a recent one I did, just on a whim, on, WPC 34, history. I got price sheets. Well, that's not what I want. So I added development history, still got nothing. So it still has its limits, but as more information gets, it absorbs more information. The other side of AI is it is an energy hog. And it's expensive. I mean, there's a lot of concern. Do we have the electric capacity to actually use it? And how do we use it efficiently? It's like a lot of tools. It's like I need a car to get back and forth to work. I don't need a Porsche. That would be dangerous. Plus, I'm too cheap to buy one. But, so what's the best and judicious work? And, of course, price competitiveness. But it's becoming a part of plant management now. I'm sure it's becoming a part of dairy management. It's not going away. I mean, my last, I just bought a new laptop, which isn't so far being very helpful, but it's got AI technology built into it to better process AI. And so hopefully someday I'm bright enough to figure out how to use it. But it's coming.
All right, let's put your hands together, or our hands together, and thank Mike Brown.